the world. We're joined in studio by Mila Matola, the CEO of Brand South Africa. It's a huge pleasure to have you with us this morning. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you, and good morning.
It's very difficult to separate Brand South Africa and Brand Madiba, or is it?
Well, in many ways, the brand that is South Africa has its values and everything bequeathed by Madiba and his generation of freedom fighters, because the ideals they stood for are the ideals that actually are infused into this brand called South Africa. And you can see it now through our constitution, through the policies we put in place. All these, I think, stand firm and are reflective of what they stood for.
Well, there's been a lot of pessimism. Some people believing that the relationship between South Africa as a country and Madiba is not really mutually beneficial, that instead South Africa is a bit of a parasite, if I could use that word, and not a very beneficial partner to Madiba, that perhaps sometimes could even tarnish Madiba's reputation by some of the headlines that we read in South Africa. Is there sort of a symbiosis in this relationship? Who benefits who?
Look, I think the first thing is to realize that we aspire towards certain ideals. But if I go back to your question, I think the brand that is South Africa today owes a lot of what it is to Nelson Mandela. If you recall, we were a pariah state before 1994, but it is he who actually, called the world back towards South Africa and went out there and said, this is now a democracy. This is now, we have established a society that is just and free, and that focuses on, humanitarianism and, the values of freedom. And I think that played a critical role in building the reputation and stature of this country. And we are still riding off the back of that stature and reputation that he built. The challenge going forward is aspirationally to say, how do we continue to strive towards those ideals and live up to those ideals? That
is the question now, isn't it? That's my next question. How? How do we do that?
Well, I think all South Africans, it behoves all of us really to make sure that we not only honor the legacy of Mandela, but we live like Mandela. I was listening to the Rabbi Spencer the other day saying we ought to live like Mandela. And I think each one of us, we've got to say, how do I lead like Mandela? How do I serve like Mandela? And in every sphere of life, that is how we really make sure that we carry this legacy forward. And I have no doubt that with our constitution and the principles enshrined in that constitution, we have a guiding document that can ensure that we realize those values. With our national development plan, we have an ideal plan that could help us realize also some of those ideals of bringing down inequality, poverty, and all those things that he actually fought for. We have the opportunity at our hands to do that.
But it's in the little things as well, isn't it? I mean, people will see the ideals as something huge. Many of us will never get to lead a country, will never get to lead a company, will never have to do things that Madiba did. But it's in the little things, how you drive in traffic, whether or not you obey the road rules, whether or not if you've been given too much change, you give it back at the till and say, no, you gave me 20 Rand, my change is actually 10 Rand. It's in those small things, is it not?
It is, in fact. If you think about it, we were just reflecting yesterday and saying, this is a time for reflection, and it is a time for reflecting in every action you take when you move forward, because everyone is a leader in their own role. You don't have to be in a position to be a leader. It's a question of saying, how would Madiba deal with this? And I think that should set the kind of guiding compass for us to deal with issues going forward, whether it's an issue of driving or whether it's an issue of leadership, whether it's in the area of service or simply doing what you're supposed to be doing or caring for your community, those values of Ubuntu and all those things. I think we need to be asking ourselves, how would he deal with it? And I think that's how we carry forward that legacy and make it a reality and not just talk about it, but act it out.
And how do we teach that to our children? I mean, many of them are saying, we've been seeing so many stories about Madiba already. Let's go back to regular viewership, or let's go back to the usual programs. How do we make sure that they don't forget and they become pessimistic?
We can never conscientize them enough. I think we need to constantly refer and give them this beacon of hope, of everything that Madiba stood for, by making sure that that memory is kept alive. Fortunately, we have the Nelson Mandela Center of Memory, where I believe that every child in South Africa needs to go through that and go through all the other spots that he touched in his life or that touched his life, to understand how we come to be where we are. In fact, the other day I was listening to a young boy who was saying at the tribute to Mandela at the center, he thanked Madiba for making sure that he never experienced oppression. And I think that is what we need to do to make sure that that legacy is carried on.
And just as we close, you've spoken about what we can do as ordinary South Africans, but as Brand South Africa, the organization, what are you doing to actively make sure that we stay on the world map for all the right things, all the right reasons?
Well, one, at home here, we will continue to exhort South Africans to play their part to make this the best country that we can and to make this the country that Madiba wish to see. Internationally, we have to continue telling the story, an evolving story of this country as we make the strides. But the two are inseparable because the story depends on what we do as South Africans. And therefore, we need to stand firm and actually act out, do the things that will make us realize our vision of that Madiba had, and we are able to then tell that story to the world. I think the two go together.
And I didn't brief you on this one, so I'm going to put you on the spot if I can, as briefly as possible. It just came to me as you were talking. A lot of discussion as to whether or not people should go to work today, or whether they should boycott work and go to the stadium. What would Mandela have wanted? I mean, I think very few of us can actually give that answer as honestly as possible. We don't know what he would have us do. But as Brand South Africa, what would you say to those who are caught between a rock and a hard place? You want to go to work, you want to be productive, make sure that our economy continues to be stimulated, but at the same time you want to keep the memory of Madiba alive. What to do?
I would say act like Madiba, or ask yourself what would he do under this. In fact, I always raise this. He said that he will walk through this world only once, and he will not allow anything to distract him from his responsibility of uniting the nation. So I think that's how I would take guidance and say, do I need to be at work and continue doing what I'm doing? Is it going to build a nation? Is it going to bring us together? If I need to, then I'll do that. But if I had the opportunity, I could go to the stadium. So I think that's how I would take it.
Thank you so much for being such a sport and answering that question for us. There you have it, a word from CEO of Brand South Africa, Mr. Miller Matola. Thank you so much again for joining us. I'm going to hand you over now to Peter.